Hello there! Welcome to skpyt Productions. I'm Crime Grace Kokon. Let's get into the video. Today's video we're going to be asking the question of what if Lavrentiy Beria succeeded Stalin? So for those who don't know, we're going to go into a little bit of context first, and then we're going to get into the alternative history. So Lavrentiy Beria was the head of the NKVD, which was the predecessor to the much more famous KGB. And at the end of World War II, at the Yalta Conference, Roosevelt was introduced by Stalin to this gentleman, and he was introduced as being our Himmler. So for those who don't know, Himmler was in charge of the SS, so he oversaw the death camps and the concentration camps within Nazi Germany. So considering they were in the middle of a war still, like the war wasn't over just yet, and this authoritarian dictator had introduced his right-hand man as being our Himmler. Yeah, it kind of shows just how murderous the Stalinist regime was. And this, of course, is no accident at all, because Lavrentiy Beria was in many ways, you could possibly argue, even a worse version of Himmler than Himmler. And the reason for that is because he oversaw an empire of misery, of slavery, and of mass murder. Yeah, from west to east, yeah, across the whole of the USSR, primarily in the frozen tundra of Siberia. Political prisoners, anyone suspected of being against the state or criticizing Stalin at all, was sent to these gulags and had to do back-breaking labor in the freezing tundra, and yeah, obviously many of them died. And on top of that, he oversaw many purges that took place. And as a matter of fact, Lavrentiy Beria himself got the job as a result of there being a purge of his predecessor. So Yezhov was in charge of the NKVD before Beria. Beria was his deputy, and Yezhov was in the middle of overseeing the purges, which went from 1936 to 1938. And so he rounded up loads of people within the party, like top generals, etc., purged them all, executed them, etc. And what ended up then happening to Yezhov is that Stalin was then suspicious of him, and then in turn the purger was himself purged, and as a result, this is how Beria ended up getting the job. So because of this, Beria understood that in a way his power was always beholden to what Stalin wanted, and so he did everything he could to please Stalin without ever kind of like stepping on his toes as such. And the level of paranoia that there was in the Soviet Union meant that you really didn't want to be stepping on Stalin's toes. And actually, the film The Death of Stalin, so definitely watch that. That film kind of really watch that, because that gives you, I know it's done in a very comical way, but many of the more serious angles to that will give you a really good insight into this era and into the different characters who are involved here. However, Stalin died in 1953, and what ended up happening then was a power struggle, because in the Soviet Union there was no clear line of succession, and so there was a competition between Malenkov, Khrushchev, and Beria. And Beria, being the head of the NKVD, had in many ways the apparatus to kind of like to take power if he wanted to, and this was attempted. And what ended up then happening is, in the midst of this power struggle, Nikita Khrushchev, who was kind of seen as a bit of a joke in all fairness, he ended up maneuvering his way right to the top, and he ended up becoming the new leader of the USSR. And as we know from studying the Cold War, Khrushchev a few years later led the de-Stalinization campaign, and so as a result we tend to think of Khrushchev as being the more like liberal kind of reformer, and obviously we see people like Beria as being obviously very much in Stalin's camps. And so the assumption has always been that Khrushchev was the better person to have taken over after Stalin. However, when we look into it, we kind of find a bit of a juxtaposition with regard to Beria, because while he was working for Stalin, he was a very, very notorious person, and we'll get onto some of his exploits in a bit. But what we have to understand is that what he wanted to do when he ended up getting to the high office himself was very different from what Khrushchev wanted. And We'll get into this in a little bit, yeah, but it was much better in many ways than what Khrushchev wanted. So, just to give you a bit of an insight in this, Beria was not a nice person. Just need to say this: he's a mass murderer, he was a mass torturer, and he was a prolific rapist as well. Yeah, you know, like many of the wives and girlfriends of his captors, you know, he would like rape them and be like, oh yeah, like, oh, I might release your husband, and obviously he didn't, but he would kind of just use that. And he was even like known to like drive around like the neighborhoods and stuff and just pick up random women and just say, look, you know, something along the lines of, there's no point in you like protesting, there's no point in you screaming, like I have all the power in this situation, so like just act accordingly, basically. So yeah, so obviously not a nice man at all, just really want to say this. However, there's obviously the interpersonal, and then there's the political in terms of how people are in their day-to-day lives, and the crimes that they commit on day-to-day lives is different from how they might have governed if they'd been at the top. So let's just take on face value what Beria himself wanted. So first off, with regard to what would have happened geopolitically. So after the defeat of Nazi Germany at the hands of the Soviet Union, the Soviet army had control over the whole of Eastern Europe, yeah, stretching from Berlin all the way to the Russian frontier. And what Stalin wanted to do was to have this kind of buffer zone, yeah, between himself and the West, because obviously the USSR had been invaded from the West many times over the course of a few decades, and so he wanted to be a number of buffer states, yeah, i.e. a number of countries in the way between any invading army and the USSR itself. And this obviously made sense from a geopolitical standpoint. However, it's kind of immoral, well, to put it very bluntly, it's very immoral to basically say that the freedom of like self-determination that you enjoy as a country, yeah, that has to be sacrificed, yeah, to serve our interests. So yeah, so as a result, Beria, in geopolitical terms, wanted to ease tensions with the West, and he wanted to also be a bit more reasonable. So he said, for instance, that East Germany was, you know, it was just a puppet state which was only kept alive by Soviet troops. So what he wanted to do was to withdraw Soviet troops from East Germany and to allow there to be a united Germany, so long as that Germany was, you know, not so hostile to Soviet interests. Yeah, so he wanted to pull them back, and so, you know, as we discussed in our video about German reunification, so definitely check that out. If there had been essentially no real East Germany, then yeah, we can imagine how differently history would be, because as we've seen, the difference between West Germany and East Germany after 45 years of separation, it was huge. And so if this had only been, well, let's say he took over in 1953, that would have only been 8 years of separation. So the gap between West and East would have been far less. And so German reunification wouldn't have cost as much. It wouldn't have had such a lasting impact. So yeah, and then never mind all the geopolitical thing. You think about Checkpoint Charlie, think about the Berlin Wall, think about all these things. Like, yeah, all of that probably wouldn't have happened if this timeline had happened. Also, on top of that, the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania had been occupied in 1940. This is part of the Nazi-Soviet pact, and what Beria wanted to do was to ease up Soviet control over these places, to either give them greater autonomy or to give them some form of independence. So again, this is in stark contrast to what Stalin and the rest of the Soviet leaders end up doing, where they basically just incorporated these free republics into the USSR itself. And obviously these free republics were the ones that sought independence the most. In 1990, before the USSR itself even broke away, these three republics actually broke away. And actually, yeah, across the three republics, there was a human chain of people holding hands and stuff, yeah, and you know, basically there's a huge upswell of public opinion that basically really demanded independence. And at that point, the Soviet troops didn't want to necessarily crack down on it, so they kind of just allowed it. But imagine if this had happened back in 1953, just how differently the world would be. Also, what would have separated Beria from Khrushchev and all the other Soviet leaders that came after him is that he wanted to focus far more on domestic policies than he did on international. So rather than having, you know, an iron grip behind the Iron Curtain as such, like, you know, he wanted to loosen control over the different satellite states in Eastern Europe, and he wanted to focus far more on economic reform within the Soviet Union itself, and also he wanted to introduce a great deal of market liberalization and stuff. So, and also, you know, never mind the fact that he wanted to give amnesty to 1 million Gulag prisoners, which, you know, makes sense if you know, you're trying to gain popularity and stuff, yeah. So what he wanted to do was be like, look, I know I was in charge of all this, but like, you know, Stalin made me. So I didn't want to. Stalin made me. So look, I'm in charge now. Just please be nice. Yeah, like kind of look, I'm being nice. Look, I've let everyone go free. Yeah, just yeah. So that was part of his plan. He wanted to basically shut down much of the Gulag system as well, and yeah, so he wanted to do economic reform, and he also wanted to do a great deal of trade with the West as well, which again is in stark contrast to what Khrushchev and later Soviet leaders wanted. So in this timeline, you would have had a much less tense Cold War. You would have had market liberalization, you know, far before perestroika, which was introduced by Gorbachev. So about 30 to 40 years before Gorbachev implemented these reforms, yeah, Beria would have tried to implement some of these reforms himself. And so in many ways, the Cold War, during the most tense time that it would have been a lot less tense, and you know, economic productivity in the Soviet Union would have been greatly improved. So pretty much it would have sped up what ended up happening like in the world by probably about 30 years. So yeah, in many ways, the world would, ironically, you know, if this mass murdering rapist had ended up being the leader of the USSR, yeah, the world might have been a much more peaceful, prosperous, and happy place. And who knows, the USSR might have continued to this day, but maybe in a much like more liberal state. So yeah, it's just something to consider. In history, what ends up happening, as we've discussed before, is the most likely thing. So the most likely thing is, because he was a mass murdering rapist, people didn't really want him. And also as well, the fact that he, you know, he wanted to have a lot more ethnic minorities in places of power within the Soviet Union. I know himself was a Georgian, just as Stalin had been, but Stalin had really bolstered Russian nationalism and had really put like especially Russians in high positions of authority. And yeah, he wanted to kind of disperse it a bit and like have a few more like kind of ethnic minorities representing things. And this obviously annoyed a lot of the Russian elite who were there. So the reason why he didn't end up becoming the leader is for the same reason as in all cases. He didn't become the leader because it was the most likely thing that he was never going to become the leader. After Stalin, people wanted a more relaxed atmosphere, and they thought that Khrushchev, being the friendly person, being the joking person, would be that person basically. So that's why they went behind Khrushchev and not behind Beria. But it's interesting to think how history might have been different if Beria had been chosen instead of Khrushchev. But you know what else is interesting? It's interesting that you've watched this far of the video and haven't hit the like button. What are you doing? What are you doing? You need to hit that like button because we're trying to hit 20 likes per video. I know I haven't rammed that message through to people's heads enough, yeah. We seem to be getting better. We're kind of, most videos now are somewhere in between like 10 to 15 likes and stuff, but get up to 20 because as soon as, see, me pushing the like button and stuff, yeah, already I can see the amount of people who are watching the videos gone up because this is how the YouTube algorithm works. You hit the like button, more people see it. You like it, so just hit the like button. It's that simple. Really signed in, you know, just a little boop, that's it. So, yeah, sorry about that. But anyway, I hope that you've really enjoyed this video. And the next video is going to be on, this might sound unlikely again, but this almost happened, and so it's something to think about. What if the Soviet Union made a separate peace deal with the Nazis, right? So we're going to be looking at Operation I'm going to keep mispronouncing it. Bagration or Bagration. I swear to you, by the time I actually film the thing, I'm going to learn how to pronounce it properly, but it's very confusingly written. But anyway, so we're going to be looking at basically the autumn of 1944, where the Soviet Union had, pushed the Nazi troops out of the Soviet Union itself, and we're going to be looking at what theoretically might have happened if Stalin had been like, yeah, you're gone now, we're not doing the rest of it. And so the Soviet Union would have just taken a defensive stance against the Nazis, and the Western allies would have had to bear the brunt of any kind of, actual liberation. So yeah, so that's what we're going to discuss in the next video. And the video afterwards, I'm planning to do what if the USSR never collapsed, which again came up much closer to happening than you might have expected. So yeah, so as with all these alternative history, definitely hit the like button, share with your friends, subscribe, and watch more of our great videos from our various different playlists. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this video and have a great day. Bye.